Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, your host, registered dietitian and intuitive eating counselor. And today I have on the podcast Elyse Resch. Hi, Elyse.
Hi, Gila. So nice to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here. And I'm sure for everyone listening, they know that you are one of the authors of Intuitive Eating, which is like has been my life's journey and mission to spread the intuitive eating knowledge. So I really appreciate everything that you've done for me and just coming on today.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's my life's mission also.
So
So
we connect on that level.
we do. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me about like how you got started even like as a dietitian. Like did you always know that you wanted to be a dietitian? Was it like was that your plan originally?
I was an elementary school teacher when I got out of
Oh,
college. All my entire young life, I just knew, intuitively that that was what I wanted to do for my career. And I loved it. I loved teaching. I did it for about 4 years. And then I had my son and took off from working outside the home. And when I realized that I wanted to do something else, or to work again outside the home, I didn't want to go back to teaching. I had this little boy at home, and I wanted to put all of my child energies into my son. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I interestingly was very orthorexic at the time, which
mm,
happened as a result of my son's father, whom I was with from the time I was 18 and he was 17 at the time. We're not together now. And his family, loving, wonderful, terrific family, extremely orthorexic. Of course, that was not a term that was known at that time, but their whole life was built around quote unquote health food.
mm-hmm,
And it was more of not anything that had to do with body size or body image. It had to do with trying to keep everybody healthy in the home.
mm-hmm,
So I was sitting around with some friends. Our little toddlers were playing together. It was a play group, I guess. And I said, I want to go back to school, but I don't know what to do. I'm not sure. I could be a lawyer, but I don't think I really want to do that. And they said, why don't you become a nutritionist? And I went, oh, that's a good idea. I was so interested in nutrition. And within a very short time, I was enrolled in graduate school, and I was 30 at the time. So this is a second career for me. And
mm-hmm.
um, I've been doing it ever since. This is my 42nd year of being a registered dietitian nutritionist, and I'm a certified eating disorder specialist also.
Wow.
So,
Okay, so when your friends told you to become a nutritionist in your mind, were you like, I'm going to save the world with healthy food? Like, because it wasn't, did it start out like with intuitive eating?
well, that's so interesting. Yes, no, it did not start out with intuitive eating. I was on this, natural food type of, today we call it wellness journey. I took a lot of years to go through graduate school. I wanted to do it slowly so I could be with my son. And I did a traineeship at the end of it with a facility that was affiliated with Children's Hospital. And it was a year traineeship, and it was working with kids with developmental disabilities. And I fell in love with that population. I was running the feeding clinic, helping the parents
Mm,
learn how to feed their kids. And I
mm,
really thought that that was going to be my career. And then I went into private practice. Well, I worked there for a while after my traineeship, and then I went into private practice. And interestingly, after about 2 years in private practice, I was asked to be the nutritionist on an eating disorder unit here in LA. It was in Beverly Hills Medical Center, which doesn't exist anymore. And it wasn't a fluke. I had been interested in eating disorders, I'm sure, because I had my own eating disorder.
right.
And my supervisor at Children's Hospital also worked at the UCLA Eating Disorder Clinic. And so she said, hey, do you want to come with me and attend the Friday morning team meetings? I said, absolutely. So for 2 years, every Friday morning, this was not with pay or or credits in any way. I just
Mm,
wanted to learn. I would go there every Friday morning. I learned so much about eating disorders. And then somebody, I don't remember who it was, knew that I was, somewhat trained in it and asked me to interview for this job. So I was the nutritionist on that team. So eating
nice.
disorders were part of my, journey. At that point, I had healed my own eating disorder, but the work I wanted to do was in the realm of eating disorders. And I wasn't getting any referrals for kids with developmental disabilities
Mm,
because of them were part of something called, let's see, what was it? It was some state organization. I can't remember right now that was funding them. and they didn't want to really pay me to see these
Mm-hmm.
kids.
Mm-hmm.
There I was working with disordered eating, but intuitive eating was not around then. It was, I was getting referrals from physicians who basically were saying, fix my client who has diabetes or my patient who has diabetes or who has high cholesterol by helping them lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't feel right to me. It was just, this was not what I was wanting to do with my life. And I didn't really know what to do. I mean, in graduate school, we learned how to make meal plans on with the exchange, the diabetic exchange system. And so I would give people meal plans. I would tell them it wasn't a diet. They could eat what they wanted. But, if you keep to this, and of course, then I was weighing them because this
Mm-hmm.
is what the doctor was, it was never right. It was not for me. And probably in the, oh gosh, late 80s, there was some literature out around non-diet. It wasn't called anti-diet then. I read Susie Orbach, who was Princess Diana's uh, therapist. Princess Diana had an eating disorder. She wrote a book called Fat is a Feminist Issue, and I was also very involved in the second wave of feminism at the time, and it really spoke to me. It's like, wait, why should we tell people what their bodies should be? And deprivation is not a good thing. I was reading a book called Overcoming Overeating by Jane Hirschman and Carol Munter, which is one of the early books that I read, and they were therapists, or I know that Jane Hirschman is a therapist, and they were talking psychologically about if you tell people that they can't have something, that's what they're going to want. And that really spoke to me. I was in therapy myself I was in therapy for many years and very interested in psychology. And so I started to have this light bulb go on within me that said, telling people what they should eat is not going to be very helpful. And in fact, I had one young client who came back the second week after I'd given her meal plan, and she said to me, I can't follow it, I'm binging. And I didn't know what to do with that. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
my own experience of dieting and binging, that was my
Mm-hmm.
eating disorder. So, but I didn't know what to say to her. So this was all kind of something's got to change. And
Mm-hmm.
I loved psychology. I was in therapy. I was reading psychological books, and I thought, okay, I'm going to write a book, and it was going to be called The Tao of Eating, TAO, Taoism, which is a Chinese philosophy that I think it's Chinese that is based on the concept of don't try to control, let things
Mm-hmm.
happen. And so I was putting, chapters on the computer, and I was starting to write things. And at the time, my co-author, Evelyn, was renting some office space for me. She lived an hour away, and she would come up to LA once a week. And I had some extra space, so she was renting it from me. And I saw her one day, and I think we were walking down the hall, passing each other by, and she did not look very happy. And I said, Evelyn, what's the matter? And she said, "Oh, I'm trying to write this book with a psychologist, and she doesn't know how to write." And it was one of those light bulb moments where I've always been a good writer. I was an English minor in college and a sociology major and English minor. And I said, I'll write it with you. It was just like one of those, things that just happened. It was synchronicity, really, was what it was. Synchronicity, things that happen at the same time that are supposed to
Yeah.
happen.
I was gonna say like synergy, like you were writing and she was writing and you walked
Yeah.
into each other.
Well, and also because what she said was so powerful, I want to write it with this psychologist. So I thought, okay, she wants somebody who can put the psychology into this. And I knew
Mm-hmm.
that I was strong in that arena.
Mm-hmm.
So we came together. She had some similar ideas, and this was 1993. So we put it together and we created a proposal, and we had three different publishing companies interested in it. We had a
Wow.
pick from them. It was a different world in the publishing world then.
Right. Right.
And we went with St. Martin's Press. So, and we've
Wow.
been with them for that book. We're in the fourth edition of Intuitive Eating now, and there are rumblings of we'll probably have to write a fifth edition. But right now, we're writing the second edition of the Intuitive Eating Workbook, which is
Oh.
a big endeavor. We've kind of updated and edited and the entire book and added two new chapters. So let's
Oh.
go with that one first before
I
we
have
take.
all of them in my office. I could show them on the screen.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, and I have the one with teenagers because I work with teenagers also.
I'm so
Um,
glad. That's my
What?
baby. That's my favorite book, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I love all the intuitive eating books, but that one I wrote, I was able to use my own teen voice in it and to speak to teens in that,
Yeah.
and also the teen in each of us.
Yes.
No matter how I'm pretty old, and it doesn't matter how old we are, that that voice, those feelings of the teenager is in us throughout our whole lives.
So
So
true. I
yeah.
love that. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go back a few steps. So, okay, so you're like reflecting on like your past by saying that you had orthorexia, but you're also saying like there was no such term as orthorexia.
No.
And then you said you healed from your eating disorder. So how did you know like in your own, I guess you're in therapy, maybe you discovered it in therapy, but did you know like, you said your ex-husband's family was very orthorexic and obsessed with health, which is like, that's kind of like what happens when you have orthorexia. You just like are afraid to eat anything. Everything has to be quote unquote healthy, whatever. So how did you heal? How did you realize that something was like wrong?
Well, I changed my life a lot. I was doing, as I said, a lot of therapy. I was no longer needing to control my own eating because I was looking for something that gave me some sense of control in this world. I mean, I can reflect back at that
Right,
now.
right.
I didn't have that urge to have
Hmm.
to control my food. And of course, the feelings of being so out of control as a result of trying to control was a
Right.
terrible way to live.
Yeah.
And in changing my life, I got a divorce and I started my career, and a lot of other things changed in my life. It just kind of left me. There was no eating disorder treatment at the time. In fact, the first therapist I had, I remember going to her one day saying, "Do you think I have an eating problem?" And she said to me, "Well, do you throw up?" Because I guess she knew about that. And I
Right.
said, "No, I don't." That She said, "Well, you look fine to me."
Right.
And that was it. In
Oh,
graduate school, we had one day of learning about anorexia. That was it. One day they showed some pictures of,
right.
someone in a very emaciated state, and that was it. There
I
was
know
no
that's
training. There were no therapists that were offering training. There were no dietitians. There was nothing.
nothing.
So it was, I bless my own journey, my own personal journey that brought me to a place of letting go of the behaviors I had and letting go of, how can I put this? Letting go of trying to make my body smaller,
Hmm.
I guess. Just
Hmm.
letting go of all of that.
Letting
And
go.
and once I let go of that, and once I let go of the restrictions that came from that family, even though, I was a dietitian, I mean, I did care about food and
Right.
eating well and eating enough, but this doesn't happen often. Most people do need to have treatment for it, but it was,
Right.
I guess, it was my journey, and it was the way
Right.
it was meant to go.
Right. So it sounds like what's coming up for me, like with my own clients, is that like oftentimes because like intuitive eating is so much the combination of nutrition and psychology, what comes up so much is like them sort of having those insights in sessions to be um, like I just so badly want to be skinny because I want whatever, my mother-in-law to accept me, or I want XYZ. And then like I say, like we're kind of working through the back door when you could work on your confidence and work on like who you are as a person. The need to control your food sometimes with a lot of help can melt away. So it's like because you kind of like experience that, that's kind of like, like colors intuitive eating in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, you're just describing it perfectly. It's exactly what happened for me. I kind of emerged, not kind of, I emerged as a different person than I had been earlier in my life. I do credit a lot of therapy for that and just my own evolution. And it was like I didn't need that anymore, and it was gone. I was
Wow.
out to dinner with a friend who has known me for, gosh, 50 years, probably 40 years anyway. And she said, "God, you eat everything." I said, "Yeah, of course I do." And she said, "Do you
Right.
remember back then when we had to
Yeah.
go to restaurants
Yeah.
and it's hard for me to even imagine living that way anymore because I would never do that."
Right. It's interesting because I have a very similar story that like I went through my own disordered eating as a teen, and like, now I could reflect on it and just think like I so badly wanted to like be loved and accepted, and I got so many compliments and it was so reinforced. But like I run the support group, and I was just telling the girls in my support group last night that something came up with my daughter, and I told her I would take her out for dinner, and she wanted to go to like this place here in the Five Towns called Chickies, which is like fried chicken sandwiches. And I already had a bunch of fried chicken sandwiches this week because we were on vacation. And I just was like, I could do this. Like, it's okay. We're gonna go. This is where she wants to go. And it's like, even if I have three, fried chicken sandwiches for 3 days in a row, I'll be okay, And I was like, whoa, it's like such a different person than when I was in my disordered eating. Like, you can't even imagine that, like, that would have such a hold on you, but like, it really, you're
Oh,
just so stuck.
well, it had a hold, and I want to say I bless it. I bless it because it got me through some hard times. It gave me something to focus on that I wasn't ready to deal with feelings at that
Right,
point.
right,
And it led me to my career, my
right.
wonderful, incredible, satisfying career that is really my life's purpose. We were
Right.
talking before.
Yeah.
Uh, there's there's a Hebrew word tikkun. You probably know the word tikkun,
Hmm.
and um, it's about finding what you're supposed to do in
Yeah.
this person. Then tikkun olam, changing the world, repairing the world. It's this, so it's truly my mission, and I love it.
Yeah.
And so
I
that's
know.
why I bless.
Yes, I agree with you. I do some public speaking sometimes in schools for like teenagers, and that's exactly when my, journey started. And I'm like, if I didn't go through this, I wouldn't be here. So we do have to, like, thank it for what it's done for us. But it's just so fascinating. Like, so many clients have these insights in session, like, whoa, I can't believe that my relationship with food was like serving me. And, like, we in the intuitive eating book, it talks about, like, food is your loyal best friend. Like, so there's a reason why we use food. It's always there. It is comforting. It helps us. And like, people are so blind to the fact that, like, food is just so much a part of our lives, and we have to have a healthy relationship with food, otherwise it can have so many negative effects. But I think it's because diet culture so um celebrates, like, not eating or only eating healthy or whatever, that, like, it just people just get so lost that they don't even realize how much it's just taken over their lives.
Well, it's brainwashing as far as I'm concerned. I discovered not too long ago that the word cult is in the middle of culture. I don't think it's meant
Interesting.
to be, but I look at it, and that's what kind of, lights up for me is it
Right,
is a cult. It is a
right,
cult. It's something
right,
that people just follow and believe and just go, well, of course,
right,
of
right,
course sugar is bad, or,
right.
things like that, that they're
Yeah,
just they're being gaslit all the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
um Yeah, I have so many questions that I want to ask you. Okay, so because also, like, I feel like the journey was so intuitive for you. Like, when I asked you before, like, did you do intuitive eating? I really meant, like, were you doing intuitive eating before intuitive eating was a book?
Ah.
But like, when you said that you, like, met Evelyn in the hallway and everything, like, it's just so interesting because it sounds like just through your journey you were like, right, diets don't work, and there's a reason why we're binging, and like, out of that, it was like, okay, but I think where people get stuck is like, if not dieting, then what? Right. So it's
Mhm.
like, that answer is intuitive eating, but it's like, you kind of just, like, came to that because there's, like, so
Well,
many
this
aspects.
here, Gila, when I was a kid, I was an intuitive eater. When I was a
Mm,
teenager, I was an intuitive eater. At that time, for whatever reason, at the high school I went to, the group of friends that I had, nobody was talking about dieting. Nobody
wow.
was talking about bodies. I wasn't part of the, I don't know, the social club girls that seemed to be, more focused on, and I shouldn't say that. I don't know for sure. That's just my conception that perhaps that I'd been in a different group of friends, maybe, but
Hmm.
I was more in the academic group, and I remember I ran for May Day Princess one time, and I didn't get voted in, but I got voted in to be in the Amphibian Society, which was the scholarships, the honor society for scholars. And so I didn't have any of that. My mother was not a dieter. My mother never talked about her body. Years later, I discovered that my father was a binge eater, but he wasn't around much. So
Hmm.
I didn't. So I didn't come to this until later in life. So I think, in answer to your question, I think I had it in me. I was an
Hmm.
intuitive eater.
Hmm.
Ate whatever I wanted to eat until I stopped. This is interesting. Until I started depriving myself of certain things because I didn't think they were healthy. It
Right.
wasn't a quest in the beginning for changing my body. It was a quest of, oh, I don't want to put anything unhealthy in my body. And then, of course, it shifted,
Hmm.
as it does. Once you're deprived,
Yes.
then you're binging, and
Right.
then you start focusing on your body. So.
Right, right. It's just so ironic, like that dieting like leads you to gain weight. And like the irony of it all is that like if we would just like let go and like take care of our bodies, and nutrition is important and movement is important, but it's like, just a part of health. And if like that's what orthorexia is like so like damaging, because it's like you're focused so on your health that your mental health has totally taken a toll.
Well, yes. I mean, if you look at the social determinants of health, have you talked about that on your
No,
podcast?
but I know that's in the book, but tell me.
Okay, so the social determinants of health really focus on what is it that impacts our health in relation to stress mostly. But
Mm-hmm.
it is looking at many factors. And if you look at it as kind of a pie shape and you see certain pieces of the pie, there is one piece that is genetics. We don't
Mm-hmm.
have over our genetics. It is what it is. Another piece has to do with what kind of substances do you take in. If you're smoking cigarettes and drinking a lot of alcohol, and that's going to impact, or drugs, street drugs, it's going to impact your health. And then the another small portion is what you eat and how much you move your body. But that's only 10% of what
Mm-hmm.
impacts health. The other 70%, so if you look at those first three as 30%, the other
Mm-hmm.
70% has to do with social factors. Do you have access to enough food? Do
Mm-hmm.
you are you worried that you're not going to be able to pay your rent and are going to be
Mm-hmm.
evicted? Do you have access to medical care, access to mental health care, access to
Mm-hmm.
education, access to socialization? And are you in a marginalized community? Do you have a marginalized identity where you're constantly worried about being oppressed, where
Mm-hmm.
people are judging you? That all of those 70, all the things in the 70% raise your stress levels. And the higher our stress, the more cortisol we're releasing. And cortisol can be damaging. It's pro-inflammatory. It can cause increased risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So when you look at that whole picture, and what you eat and how you move is only 10% of what affects your health, it really helps to not be so worried about eating whatever it's going to be, fried chicken sandwiches every day.
Right. Right.
It's just not going to have an impact, which
Right.
doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about feeding yourself certainly sufficiently, and
Mhm.
and getting a lot of variety of foods and things like that, balance throughout your day, but you don't have to stress about it.
Right. Right. It's so interesting. I remember listening to Brene Brown on a podcast, and I believe she said this. I'll have to find the quote, but she said that um like the highest like the I guess I'm trying to think how she said it, but like basically like what like the highest morbidity rate is when somebody is lonely. Like loneliness basically
Yeah,
leads to like an
yes,
early death,
yeah.
which is like duh, like like for whatever reason, health has been, I say, like diluted, like totally
Yes.
down to like just the way you eat and the way you move, which is so sad, especially based on what you just said about the social determinants of health. That's like so tiny compared, and it's like, and those other things we really have a little bit more control, not all control, but like just like hang out with friends or like talking about your feelings. Like that's what comes up a lot in sessions, that like, of course you're binging, like you can't hold all those feelings in, like something's got to give.
But it's a privilege, and we always have to be owning our privileges. It's a privilege to be in a place where you can have the time to go socialize.
Hmm.
There's people that have to work three jobs a day or a week or whatever it is to feed their family. They're
Hmm.
worried that the lights are going to get turned off. So yes, those are so important. And the concept of socialization is so important. Loneliness is such a painful and difficult, stressful position to be in. And not but, I never use but, and we want to stay aware, those of us who are privileged enough to have sufficient, access to all of these things that I mentioned, that not everybody does have that, and to have
Right.
compassion.
Right.
Compassion and self-compassion, compassion toward others and self-compassion are one of the keys of intuitive eating.
Totally. Yeah. I have to tell you this. It will give you like nachas, we say like in
Yes, of
Hebrew.
course.
Yeah. I remember, like, I just feel like we're on a little bit of a parallel journey, that like when I heard about intuitive eating, it was at a time in my life that I felt like I just was not okay. I felt so I honestly felt depressed because I had become a dietitian to help people with their relationship with food, and I just was like the food police, and I felt
Uh-huh.
so down about it because I struggled with my own eating stuff, and I was like, I got this, I'm going to help people. And then when I started working, I just felt like we are just the food police, and like naturally, intuitively, I knew like that didn't work for me in high school, and it just made me feel worse about myself. And I was like, but I can't, what am I supposed to do? Like, I need to feed my family. Like, I was already married with kids, and like that was our like primary income at the time. And like I was just so down. And somebody told me about intuitive eating, and at like kind of like at the same time, like intuitive eating, and then learning about self-care from somebody else, even though it's very much in line with intuitive eating, and really practicing those tools. And then my therapist told me about self-compassion, and I'm like, yes, 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 yes. Like my whole world like turned, you know?
It all comes together,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to. It's
Yeah.
if you're present, if you're really listening to yourself and listening to what's out there, and if you're a compassionate person just naturally, if you care about people, it really helps to bring you to this place. It's interesting that, yeah, dietetic school is not a really great thing. I mean, we
Yeah.
may learn a lot of science, which is
Yeah.
important. I'm
Right.
very grateful for the my understanding of how the human body works and what it needs. But boy, they are so behind. I'm
Yeah.
hoping there's some schools now that are different. I
Yeah.
mean, to graduate school in, gosh, when did I go to graduate school? Yeah, when I was 30, a long time ago, a long, long time ago in the 70s, So is it different now? You're much younger than I am. Is graduate
I
school any
mean,
better?
I'm 33, and so I graduated maybe like less than 10 years ago. No, not really. It's very diety, and I remember learning about intuitive eating, and I'm almost positive, I hope I did this. I had a great professor in my grad. I had a lot of great professors, and I went to Lehman for my graduate school. I went to Queens for my undergrad, and she was such a good teacher. Like I love medical nutrition therapy. I love learning about the human body, and I just remember learning about intuitive eating and being like, I never learned this once in all my schooling. I never heard intuitive eating. And I emailed this professor who was so knowledgeable and so um, experienced. She was working in a hospital at the time. And I just was like, why do you even know what this is? Like this is like what you should be teaching, you know? And I was just like, no, I don't know what it is. Like it's and I hope that there's like, a brighter future, because like dietitians are becoming so more outspoken and on Instagram, and everybody's, intuitive eating has exploded. Like I want to ask you about that. Like, could you have ever imagined when you put out that book what would have happened?
Never, never would have imagined. But it was right. I just knew it was right. It's what resonated with me, and it was the answer to what people would say to me. Well, I don't know how to eat.
Right,
So
right,
actually you do because you
right,
were born that way.
right, right.
I've observed little kids who are getting enough food, obviously, who have reliable source of, attention and food and aren't pulled away from that. They are just natural little intuitive eaters. And that's what
Yes,
we base the philosophy on, actually.
right,
And it's
right.
getting us reconnected to what we were born with.
Totally. I
The
have 4 kids. I see it with my kids. It's amazing.
horrible.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yes. It's a bit busy, busy. Lots to learn about the feeding dynamic with 4 kids. So actually I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned before, what do you like, what definition do you like to use for intuitive eating?
There's this broad definition that it's a self-care process to help you get reconnected with your intuitive wisdom. And it's based on these 10 principles that are guidelines, they're not rules. But that doesn't really tell you what it is.
Hmm.
And so I was reading a book, oh gosh, a lot. Oh, I guess it was when we were writing the third edition. And it was by Peter Levine, and it was called Waking the Tiger. And he was talking about the evolution of the brain, and he talked about during the dinosaur era that the dinosaurs basically were being driven by instinct to survive. That was it. And then he took it over time, and he looked at mammals and how mammals then develop this limbic or emotional part of their brains. And then as we became humans, it was the human cortex. Now, there's been question as to the science of this in terms of when each one of these did evolve, whether they were all there when the dinosaurs were there, but they just weren't activated. That doesn't matter. It's what matters is that we are employing all parts of our brain
Hmm.
when we are eating. And so instinctually, we're typically going to get hunger signals, fullness signals. How does food taste in our mouths? What are our preferences that way? That's instinct to survive. But then we have this emotional part of our brains that is affected by, our feelings, obviously, and that can impact our hunger and fullness. I mean, sometimes if you're deeply, deeply depressed, you have no hunger, or
Hmm.
sometimes you're just want food to comfort you all the time.
Hmm.
And we have to use the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, the rational part, to soothe our emotions, to pay attention to what's affecting our instincts. Illness can affect instincts. I mean, I've had clients who've had COVID and they lose their taste and their
Hmm.
sense of taste and smell, and yet they still have to eat.
Right.
So my definition, long entree into that, is intuitive eating is a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and thought. So if we stay present to what our bodies are telling us, to what our emotions are telling us, if we utilize the thinking part of our brain in a way that's very clear and not affected by diet culture, that's how people end up reconnecting with their
Amazing. I
weight.
love that. That's such a good way to explain it. Um, yeah, I think people just think like eating is like, either like people say like, oh, intuitive eating, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're full. I'm like, that's just like a part of it, like there's so
A
many things going.
reductionist,
Right. Yeah.
and let me just throw something in that you weren't asking me, but one of my pet peeves is, and I'm an eating disorder specialist, so one of my pet peeves is hearing in the eating disorder treatment community that you can't use intuitive eating right off with people with eating disorders. It's like, wait a minute. Yes, hunger and fullness is not going to be accurate when somebody's undernourished. They're not going to be able to have those signals that they can depend on. In fact, if they try to, then they're going to promote their,
Yeah.
perpetuate eating disorder. But there are 10 principles of intuitive eating. There are so many things that can be worked on from day one.
Hmm.
Because, and the reason I say this, and then I'll explain a little more of that, is that often I have treated people who have been through some really, intensive eating disorder treatment. Their symptoms are healed, but their mind is still obsessing on, especially if they had exchanges in their treatment or they were weighing and measuring food or whatever. And
Hmm.
so, there's so many other aspects that need to be addressed to help somebody fully free themselves from their eating disorder. So we can talk about diet culture. We can talk about how it has impacted their eating disorder or, instigated their eating disorder. We can talk about respecting the body. We can talk about making peace with food. We can
Hmm.
talk about emotions. I mean, you go through all the other principles and they can be talked about on day one.
Hmm.
So, such a reductionist concept that intuitive eating is the hunger fullness diet.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
it's just so wrong
Yeah.
and it does irritate me a lot.
It's very irritating. But why do you think so many people get it wrong? Like, why do you think, like, I say it's just hard to explain on one foot. That's how I explain it because there's just so many things you want to explain and it's hard to explain it in one breath?
I think people want an easy answer. They
Right.
want it's hard to dig deeply into any issue. It takes a lot of intellectual strength, and psychological hardiness and all that. And so I think people just want to say, oh, that's what it is, and that's the answer. But here's the thing. I think that they think it's about weight loss. They still think
Right.
it's about weight loss.
Right.
And
Right.
so if they only can make sure that they eat at the perfect level of hunger and stop at the perfect level of fullness, then oh boy, they'll lose weight. And I
Hmm.
think that's where it gets stuck right there because it's a
Right.
misconception of intuitive eating.
Right. Actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking that people just so badly are like again blinded by weight loss, like by the pursuit of weight loss or the need for weight loss. It's so sad, but that when somebody says like, no, it's actually not about weight, and it's like I could teach you about your hunger, fullness, and coping with your emotions. It's reduced in their, it really is reduced in their mind to like, but will I lose weight? And like exactly what you're saying, you have to. We all know this, like you have to be ready to do this kind of work because otherwise, like we plant seeds as providers, but like if somebody just comes to me and they're like, I don't really care, like if intuitive eating works, just help me lose weight. And I'm like, but I'm not going to do that. And they're just like, but could you try? And I'm like, you're too stuck. Like right now, you're too stuck.
So what this is what after all these years of doing this and kind of the wisdom of being an of age kind of thing, I stopped fighting with people. So what I say to people when they come in and tell me, yeah, I want to lose weight, I say, I have strong compassion for you because you're in this diet culture. Of course you are being, influenced to think that this is going to make your life so much better. And so I understand why you want to do this. Intuitive eating is not focused on weight loss. Intuitive eating is focused on helping you, heal your relationship with food, with your body. And I'm not going to fight with you about it, but I do want to tell you that if you keep your focus on weight loss, it's going to disconnect you from all the other signals. So are
Hmm.
you willing to put weight loss on the back burner? I'm not promoting it. I understand you want it,
Hmm.
but it's going to be a detriment to your healing.
Yeah.
So it's a way of honoring the fact that, they are so deeply influenced. Well, of course, because
Right.
diet culture is so pervasive and
Right.
insidious and all over.
Right. Right.
And people come down a little bit when I say this and they say, okay, you're not shaming me for wanting to
Right.
lose weight.
Right.
Of course, I'm not shaming you. Why would I? Because a lot
Right.
of people think, oh, intuitive eating counselors, they're shaming people. They tell them,
Right.
what's wrong with you for wanting to lose weight?
Right. Right.
No, no, I understand you're in this culture and it's
Hmm.
so hard. But let's put it aside right now.
Hmm.
I am never going to focus on that, but I do understand, how you've been taught that that's how you're going to make your life happy. We're going to work on the freedom you're going to get from trusting your body, from enjoying food again. Satisfaction for me is the driving force of intuitive eating. You're going to love eating again, and you're going to
Hmm.
feel free of all of that influence out there, because you're going to know you can trust your body. Does that make
Right.
sense?
That's yes. I have to tell you that I think this happens to a lot of people. Tell me what you think. But when we learn about intuitive eating and health at every size, this happened to me that you kind of go the other extreme and you do kind of feel like shaming people for wanting to lose weight. You're like, I found myself going over to people who were talking about it, being like, no, 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 guess what? Like I thought I was enlightened, so therefore everybody would be so enlightened, you know? And that was obviously not what happened at all. So first of all, I did kind of learn like, oh, people don't really want my advice unless they ask me. So I kind of had that like natural like learning experience. And Christy Harrison speaks about it in her book, Anti-Diet, that like remember that sometimes you do need a boundary. Like if somebody's like fighting you on intuitive eating, you don't have to fight with them. And I think through that journey, which was a journey for me, I'm like, I do start sessions like that with clients and I tell them I totally get why you want to lose weight. It makes
Right.
sense. You're in a world that's literally tells you you're a better person if you're skinnier. Like we're like, of course, like that you want that. And like hopefully we'll work through the freedom. So I just really appreciate that answer because I feel like I don't know if everybody goes through that when they learn about intuitive eating, but I feel like it's sad that people think that we're shaming, like that the intuitive eating community is shaming people because like that's like so the opposite of what intuitive eating is about.
Well, it's the opposite of who we are as social justice advocates. I mean, we want everybody to have equal treatment and respect and, dignity. And so why should we shame someone who is just being, so highly influenced by the culture? We just want to help them find a way out of it.
Right.
Shame never gets anybody to, want to, it's not motivating.
Right, right. It's much more like empowering and empathetic and compassionate to be like, I'm with you, I hear you, like, and I'm also here to like help you.
Yes, absolutely. I just mentioned social justice, and I do want to say that I work with a lot of teenagers. I love the teenage population, probably because my own teenager internally is so strong. Um, what I'm finding in these young people that I'm working with is they are looking at life through a social justice lens. They
Mm,
are so much more educated. I was never educated in that when I was a kid. Nobody talked about that. It was a natural thing for me because I went to public school and it was very, integrated public school of all different, types of people coming from different races and religions. But nobody talked to me about it. I never thought about it. And today, these kids, oh my goodness, they're just, when I say to them, what do you think about social justice? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not right for anybody to be judged. And then it's like, okay, well, how come people out there in the world who are in larger bodies are being judged? How do you feel about that? And
right.
it gives them this cognitive dissonance moment. And it really helps them have a motivation to let go of their own pursuit of weight loss.
Wow, that's really good to hear. Amazing.
Yeah, it's
We
very
need to
exciting.
spread that. We need to spread it over here in New York.
Well, I'm in California, you're in New
Yeah,
York. We're at the,
yeah,
the capitals of focus on bodies, and
yeah,
fitness.
yeah,
That,
yeah.
but I think if we are deeply compassionate ourselves and our clients can feel that
Right,
and they understand that we understand what they're going through and we're honoring their intellectual pursuits, their
right.
social pursuit. It really helps them think more deeply. I'm lucky some of the teenagers I get are pretty bright kids, and so they're going to think
That's,
about it.
I love that. That's so good to hear. So motivating. Actually, do you know Dina Cohen? She's an eating disorder dietitian in
Uh-huh.
Lakewood. Yeah, she's awesome. So I did some supervision with her, and she told me like in the beginning, I was like, I don't know how to counsel, I don't know how to do this. We're not taught to counsel in school for all those years, right? Like it's a whole different skill to learn how to sit with someone, and right. So she told me, she's like, I promise you, like one of the most powerful things that you could do for someone is sit with them in their
Mm.
pain. And I was
Yeah.
like, really? She's like, that's like half the battle. And I was like, okay, I could do that.
As dietitians, quote unquote, dietitian, I hate the word actually. I was
Yeah,
glad
I
when it
know.
have, became the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics rather than the American Dietetic Association. We were trained, especially my era of people, to be very black and white in our thinking, to be very, numbers were what was going to show success. And I think we were also sociologically trained to feel less than.
Mm.
On the pecking order, the doctor is up at the top, the
Hmm.
dietitian's down the
Yeah,
bottom.
yeah.
Um, and I think that we haven't felt that we do have a right to have a voice. I mean, here's my feminist part coming out too, but to have a voice, to speak up, to be able to be strong in our convictions and convey it to our clients. So I think it's part of being a dietitian. It was also kind of part of being a teacher. When I was a teacher, it was we weren't high on the pecking order, as they called it, but
Mm.
we're getting there now. It's
Yeah,
getting
no, you're right. It's true. I remember like one of my professors saying that like if you don't do your job well, like they'll just make the nurse do your job because anyone could really do your job. And it was so unmotivating. Like, is that really then why do I need to become a dietitian? I might as well go to nursing school, you know? And of course, like again, through the intuitive eating journey that I went on, along with a lot of other self-help stuff that I was doing at the same time, I was like, we're so important. Like dietitians are so important, and like we're so much more than telling people what to eat. And like I do think people are empowered, dietitians are empowered to do this work.
Yes, and I think that sometimes people are scared to go into therapy, but they'll come to the dietitian because it doesn't feel as threatening. We may be
Yeah.
the first healthcare professional that they talk to. So the more they feel safe, the more, they feel empathy from us, the more they'll open up. And then they'll trust us enough to perhaps need to, go to therapy to deal with some of the things in addition to what they're dealing with us. So yeah, we're very powerful, very
Yes,
important.
yes. So I don't want to keep you past the time, but I want to ask you like, so like you said, like you never expected intuitive eating to become what it is, and now the book is in its fourth edition. So what kind of happened like when the book came out and the public read it and then it was, updated second, third, fourth, like what was that trajectory like?
Well, it's so interesting. If you look at it from a capitalistic standpoint, publishing companies are not going to ask you to do second editions, third editions if they're not selling the books. I mean, that's a
Right,
terrible way to look at it, but it's the reality.
right.
So clearly it was taking hold from the beginning, or else we would have never been offered the second edition and on and on and on. And then that was St. Martin's Press, and now we're very involved with New Harbinger for all the workbooks and my intuitive eating journal and the card deck and all the things.
Mm,
Now, I will say that New Harbinger is very focused on care, on
mm,
helping people. So it's not simply, I don't mean to be saying it's simply money making, but I think what happened was we didn't even realize it was spreading as much as it was spreading,
mm-hmm,
but people were finding it. I remember in those early days, I was doing book signings and talking to people at a bookstore. A bookstore would set it up, and people were like, "Oh, wow!" They never heard of anything like that. And
right.
words when it has some, substance and some, meaning for them to attach to, it spreads so little by little by little. And, people say to me, I'm going to be 79 this year. So people say to me, you're still working, you're full time. I said, why would I ever retire? Because
Wow.
it's not only is it so meaningful for me and I love it so much, but it has a life of its own. It keeps moving on and on. Like our podcast today, I do a lot of podcasts because people want to know about it and want to tell
Right.
their followers about it. I have two talks coming up, one for a group of parents. I have one for actually the graduate school I went to. They asked me to come and speak to the dietitians there. It just keeps happening. Requests come in, media interviews. It's got the life of its own and it just won't stop.
It's really it's so amazing. And like, it must just be so amazing for you and Evelyn that you are so like able to impact so many people and change their lives for the better. And like, that's really what intuitive eating is doing.
Well, it's the spiritual part of my life anyway. It is, thank goodness I feel that I have been doing something and continue to do something in this world that can help the world, that can help change people, that can help give them better lives. It just has so much meaning for me. So yes, it's very powerful in that way.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm not, like my whole profession is built on it. So thank you for doing that for all of us.
As you bring that up, years ago, I had, she's a good friend of mine, but she was my associate for a number of years, and she was a dietitian. She was a dietitian, and she was ready to quit. She wanted to go into some other, she hated being a dietitian. I said, wait a minute, let me take you out to dinner and talk to you about intuitive eating. This was in the early days of it. And she was awed. She didn't even really know much about it. And she changed her whole career and loved every minute of her career
Yeah,
from that point. She was
right.
about to leave it.
Yeah.
So, it's yeah.
That's how I
So
felt. That's really how I felt because I felt like just that out of alignment. Like I know that this isn't helping people by shaming them and telling them what to eat. Like I that's not my job, but I didn't know what was my job because I had never heard of intuitive eating in school. And again, like I never knew how to, start a practice. We don't have those skills, unfortunately, in school. And I wish it was different, but I'm also really happy that there are so many dietitians doing intuitive eating and people are getting this knowledge. But I think there's still a lot of resistance personally in my life. I still feel the resistance is hard, like sometimes you feel like you're like swimming upstream, but
but
um,
but not necessarily everywhere. Evelyn and I did a talk in 2019. I judge things, or I remember things now based on before or after the pandemic, but it was
yeah,
it was in Philadelphia, and we were giving it was the first talk that the Academy of Dietetics was doing on intuitive eating. They didn't even know about it, I don't think. And I remember that morning walking into the room, and it was this huge room, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, we had over 2,000 people, young
wow.
dietitians, come into that room, and it was standing room only. They were
That was fancy,
so
right?
excited. That was fancy. So
Yeah.
excited and interested in that. Were you there?
I wasn't. I still regret missing it because I heard it was amazing.
And so it was very, encouraging for me to see that all these young, they weren't all young, there were some older ones too, but a lot of young dietitians who were like, "Whoa, we're really
Yeah.
interested," that it was speaking to them. So,
Yeah, it happens to be. I'm going to wrap up, but I have a friend who's a dietitian and she's a little older than me. So she was working before me. And then my first job was taking over her maternity leave while she was, and like I would ask her all my questions about like nursing homes and all the stuff that I like absolutely hate doing with a passion. I love people, but the charting and the weight,
oh,
and oh gosh. So, but like after I started my own practice, um, like so a few years later she was still at that job and they asked me to come in to help with charting because like sometimes I'll do that for nursing homes. I won't do that anymore. I cannot do that anymore, but anyways, I went to go help and I basically just told her like that I have a private practice and I do intuitive eating and she's like, oh, what is that? And like just from like a few months later she texted me, oh, could I'm reading this book and that book and then like a few years later I'm like, oh, how did you like come to intuitive eating? She's like, just from that one conversation when you helped me. And I was like, it's just life changing. Like I just wish more people would hop on the bandwagon.
You touched her, she's touching these people.
Right,
Every time
right,
we talk with somebody, every time someone hears a podcast like this, it opens their eyes and then they talk to somebody else. And that's how it spreads. I
right.
think there have been, I don't know, close to 800,000 copies of Intuitive Eating sold,
Wow.
something like that.
That's
700,000, 800,000,
that's a
I
lot.
don't know.
Yeah.
But a lot. It just, people want to know about it.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you so much for coming on. This was so great. I feel so honored to be here with you and to have met you finally. And really, I know you so well because I read all your books. But okay, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Gila.
Okay, sure. Have a great day. Bye.